Hi, everyone. Welcome to Take Part. This is the podcast where we talk about joining in and reaching out to experience deeper connection, better your life, and achieve your goals. I'm so excited about today's episode. Before we dive in, I just want to say this is a new podcast, so really appreciate you subscribing on YouTube, following us on your favorite podcast platform, or you can subscribe and get notified every time there's a new episode at takepart.substack.com. You can also reach out to me if you want to propose a new idea for the podcast or have any comments or thoughts. And that is takepart@tuta.com, Tuta.com. All right, let's dive in. We're going to talk about ham radio today. And I'm joined by Madelyn Mills, which I'm very excited about. Hi, Madelyn.
Hello, Emily.
Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so hi, I'm Madelyn. My call sign is KJ7NUW for any of my ham friends out there. I live in Seattle. I'm a queer woman in my late 40s. I work in technology management here in Seattle. And my favorite hobby is ham radio. And what else? My favorite food is cheese.
Cheese,
There.
I love it. That's a great favorite food. That is a classic favorite food. And Madelyn and I have known each other for a couple of years in Seattle. We both live in the Seattle area, and I had no idea that this was something that you did. So when you told me about it, I was like, "What is that?" And what? And tell me more. So let's start with that. For the people listening who don't know what ham radio is, what even is it, and how did you get into it?
Yeah, so I think I'll start with how I got into it because, like, when I was a kid, there was somebody in my extended family. I think she would be like a third cousin or something. She was my grandpa's cousin. Back in the day, she used to, for her church, she would be in contact with like people that were like missionaries, like all over the world. And she would collect their stories over her radio. And they had a big antenna in the backyard. And she would tell the stories about what people were doing around the world. And I was just fascinated by that. I was fascinated by the connection, especially in days where, back in the day where it was so expensive to communicate by telephone. And this was all free. And so when I was a kid, like she taught like a class about it. And as kids, we got our ham radio license. We took a test together and then we got licensed by the FCC to use the airwaves. And I kind of drifted away from it, but came back during the pandemic when I was like by myself in my house. And we were all kind of waiting things out, and I was just dealing with loneliness and kind of depression. I was like, I need to find ways to connect. And I remembered this thing. And I came back to the hobby again. And I discovered that like this like kind of old school technology where people are talking to each other over the airwaves is alive and well. And there's this whole community of people there. So I got connected that way. And I just fell in love with it. So in terms of what ham radio is, it is like, so there's the government administers the public airwaves. And that's everything from like the airwaves that our phones use to communicate with cell towers and connect us to the world, to like the radio stations that we listen to in the car, to like commercial radios like that police and fire and those institutions use. So the government licenses it all out. And as individuals, you can take a test and you can get a license and you get assigned an identifier, just like, WKRP in Cincinnati. I'm KJ7NUW in Seattle. And what it does is it gives you permissions to talk on the public airwaves. So that's what we do. It's not that hard of a test. You kind of learn some basics like how to not collide with each other or other official services. And you get a radio like this, a little walkie-talkie type thing, and you're connected. Like you're connected to all these other people. So that's kind of what ham radio, like I'm so simplifying it down. That's kind of what it is.
Yeah, that's so awesome. Okay, so do you talk one-on-one or do you talk in groups or both?
Yeah, it can be both. So a lot of the long distance communication especially can be more one-on-one. But you're transmitting over the public airwaves, so anybody can listen. Like people that have a scanner or whatever can listen in on it. So we do make a lot of one-on-one connections. But there are these things called nets. And this is where multiple hams can get on a single frequency and chat and operate together.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's kind of both.
Very cool. Is this, it reminds me of like what I think of truckers. Like, is it a similar to the trucker thing?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So it is similar in that that also is a radio and it's also used for communication. So it is similar in that. And a lot of like CB radios look kind of like this, where you see these kinds of looking things like in Walmart or whatever.
Yeah.
But CB is citizens band and anybody can do it. You can just buy a radio off the shelf, you can use it, and it's great for like just like keeping in touch with family and that sort of stuff. Ham radio though it's another level up in that Citizens Band is like constrained to just like a few, like just a small amount of radio spectrum. And ham radio, you can operate in all kinds of different frequencies and channels, if you will. And there's just a little bit more order to it because ultimately the reason that ham radio exists, the reason that we are given sections of the public airwaves is because it's a service that we provide during an emergency. Um, when cell phone networks go down and if the grid goes down and the power goes out or whatever, ham radios just keep working. They work on battery. You can talk all over the world. And so, the FCC wants people that know how to operate together in an emergency to keep communities connected and to provide a public service. And what's so cool about ham radio for me, like in this sense, is that, in my community, I'm a ham radio operator, like for my neighborhood, right? My neighbors don't even really know this. But if the grid goes down, like if Mount Rainier blows, I know how to hop on the airwaves. I know how to interact with other hams in other communities. And I could relay a message from my community to anywhere in the world, even if the grid was down.
Wow.
And so it's this super valuable service. And like, that's kind of like the reason that it exists.
Yeah. Do they cover that sort of thing in the training? Like, are they like, here's how to, deal with an emergency, or is it more just a hobby training?
Oh yeah, they do. Like part of the test that you take and part of the training is around like how to operate properly, but it's pretty basics. Like you kind of learn the rules. And there's just some basics that come with it. But once you sort of get into the community and you start interacting with people and you start listening, that's when I think you learn the most. And there's all of these different groups and like subcultures within ham radio that you can get into. There's people that coordinate with like fire and police and medical. There's people that coordinate like more longer distance communication or types of digital communication, this sort of stuff. So you kind of find your niche, and then you connect with those people and you end up learning mostly through the community.
Yeah. Okay, that's so awesome. So what's your niche? Like where do you go in this and what got you hooked? Like what kinds of things do you talk about?
Yeah, so ham radio has all of these different like subcultures in it. And like if I was to like try to slice it up into some bigger themes, you have people that are kind of like tinkerers and technologists. You have people that are like infrastructure and connectors, like with police and fire and that sort of stuff. And so they are really into how would we connect in an emergency. You have a kind of prepper type that's like off grid and they're like hiking mountains and they're figuring out how to like survival type skills and that sort of stuff that are connected to the community. For me, it's really about community and connection itself. How I came back to it was in the context of the pandemic, in the context of feeling lonely. And although we're all trained to operate together and to be there to sustain community and society in crisis or in times of difficulty, during all the other times, like we're just people on the airwaves that just interact with each other.
Right.
And like on any given night of the week, you can turn on the ham radio and you hear people talking about like, maybe they're about their grandkids or their dating life or the sauerkraut that they have going on the countertop Or like, yeah, like technology too, obviously. We nerd out about that. But to me, what drew me to it was the community and the connection. And like in a world where most of our connection is through these commercial social media platforms,
Mm.
right? That are algorithmically driven, and all of our communication is algorithmically mediated.
Yeah.
And we're sliced into little information in bubbles and echo chambers. And where these technologies amplify our division, ham radio stands apart. It is like a recreation of like the old public square.
Ah,
And we're all in this common space. We're all on a common frequency, and we have to get along, you know?
yeah.
And so there's incredible diversity in it. And I think that it's incredibly powerful for that. And this is what excites me the most about him is it's been around for a long time, and it just it brings people together in a way that's different. It's different than our everyday life.
Yeah. That's so fascinating. And I'm so interested in what you said about, you have kind of no idea who you're talking to. You you have all these different backgrounds, you have all these different interests. How do you think about that? Does conflict come up? Is anyone ever an asshole? Like, do you encounter people, how does that work with this kind of community?
Yeah. Okay. Well, first off, yes, there definitely are jerks out there, and the community being what it is in the world that we're in, like, yes, there's definitely some like rough edges around it
Yeah.
at times, and it is incredibly diverse. Like ham radio is diverse not only in terms of like the different like subgroups and the different types of technology and equipment that we use, but like the people as well. What I will say though is that like for the most part, it's really quite orderly.
Hmm.
And like the vibe of the community overall is we tend to kind of shy away from talking about politics or religion too much.
Mm,
There's just kind of like an agreement where we know that it's all there, right? We know that it's all under the surface and we all have opinions about those things. But we kind of preserve this space, this on-air space. We mostly preserve it for like the greater purpose.
mm.
And the greater purpose is connectivity and community resilience. And so it ends up being overall like pretty civil because of that.
Yeah.
But yes, conflict comes up and, sometimes people misbehave. I think one of the things that kind of helps under the surface too is like if you really misbehave, like if you start operating in a way that is like against the rules, like there's pretty serious fines that
Huh.
can eventually come from it. Like the FCC can fine people thousands of dollars for being disruptive or whatever.
Yeah.
And that's not just for like expressing an opinion that's unpopular, but I'm talking about like being disruptive and breaking the network.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So there's this kind of, yeah, there's that piece too where, yeah, we're there for the greater purpose. And we kind of leave some of that stuff off to the side in order to be part of that greater purpose.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I love that. I love that. It's really interesting to me, the comparisons that you're making to social media, right? Because on one hand, social media is sort of a cesspool of, people expressing their opinions and, not caring the impact they have on other people, right? And then also, social media can feel like you have this sense of connection, but you're not really connecting, and so it sounds like ham is a good contrast to both of those things.
Yeah. Yeah, it really is. Another thing that's kind of interesting about ham is that it's not anonymous. Like when you register your call sign, like mine, when you get assigned an identifier, like it's tied to your name
Yeah.
and an address, like a mailing address that is registered to you. So like it could be a PO box or it could be whatever. But the bottom line is like there's this kind of like the privilege of operating on the public airwaves is like you have to identify yourself.
Mhm.
Now that's super useful because we use that like practically in order to like in an emergency scenario, like
Right.
a hurricane or like the ice storm on the northeast back in the early 2000s, or I mean, even last year we had a huge blackout here in the Puget Sound area, and hams were coordinating communication when cell phones, power, everything went down. hams were calling in for emergency services and to fix the. So
Wow.
anyway, you can't be anonymous, when you're in ham. And that's kind of nice because you're kind of like in the room with the people.
Yeah.
And when we're in the same space with people, we're less likely to pick fights, I think. Whereas you're right. I see social media spaces. And by the way, I spend too much time on social media still, but I see these spaces as like we're the product. The technology is designed not for human connection as a primary motivator, but to sell us ads and capture our attention. And the way they do that is by attempting to trigger us, by feeding us with things that play into our fears and division. And like that is a perversion of connection.
Hmm.
Like that I think is net detrimental to society. And that's where like this old school way of having us be in the same space. It's a virtual space, right? Maybe it's the original social network. I don't know.
Yeah.
But by having us be in this same space, it helps us, I think, move back to something that is better. Like I think it moves back to a time when connection meant more than just likes and angry emojis and, the stuff like that we experience online.
Yeah. Yeah. Like you said, with this old school technology that's been around for ages and isn't really anything fancy in some ways. So you started this during the pandemic. Obviously, that was, a time where we were all looking for some way to connect outside of, being in our own houses. What's changed since then? Has it expanded? Do you meet these people in person? Like, have you made deep connections through this?
Yeah, I really have. So I came to it in the pandemic and mostly to just like connect with people and initially made connections online. But in the group of people that I hang out with here in the Seattle area, like we get together pretty regularly.
Hmm.
Like it happens more during the summer than the winter months, obviously. But yeah, we do these things called rain or shine nets where we get together, whether it's rain or shine, and people bring little, pop up, tents, and we get together and like have a picnic together. We do waffle nets where people bring waffle makers and big batteries, like the type of batteries that they would use to power their ham radio in an emergency. So we'll get together somewhere, bring big batteries, hook up waffle makers to it, and like make waffles and share that together. A few weeks ago, we had an ice cream social for two hams that got married.
Oh,
We did that in Green Lake Park. So yeah, we get together in person, and there's people, of course, that get together to do kind of like the people that are like into doing drills, like practicing, supporting like search and rescue operations, for example. They might get together and practice that,
yeah.
or those types of things happen too. So yeah, you can connect virtually on the air, and we have many people that are part of it that are in the hospital, or they're people that can't join us in person. So there's many people that can participate that way, but we also get together. And I've made some very close friends through it. So yeah, it's a wonderful place to find people. And it's surprisingly diverse.
That's lovely. That's so lovely. Um, I think you've kind of already covered this, but what what have you learned, or what does Ham teach us, I guess, about building community? Like what do you think is important from how you've interacted with the Ham community that we need to, you know, learn from and take into other spaces?
Yeah, that's a good question. One of the things that I think helps make ham radio what it is our willingness to think about a greater purpose, the greater purpose of connection and resilience, and to be willing to set aside temporarily some of the everyday squabbling that we do with each other, especially through these algorithmically mediated channels. There is something there that for me, I think is incredibly powerful and very countercultural
Mm.
to our modern times. Like whatever happens to our country and our society, whether it's natural disasters or human created ones, like the beauty of ham radio is that there is this community of incredibly different people who are committed to a kind of greater purpose of connectivity. But I think that what is so powerful about it is that, yes, like when the shit hits the fan, or if the shit hits the fan, ham radio operators will be there to call an ambulance and to provide community resilience in a very practical way. But if the shit hits the fan, right, and people are fighting with each other, or if society is destabilizing, I think that the ham radio community provides a stabilizing force for civic interaction and civility, and provides our society with a kind of resilience to those types of things that I think would be disastrous as well. And to me, that's just like immensely, immensely powerful in a way that I think social media is not going to be there for us. You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. Totally. That's kind of exceptional, kind of spectacular. Like I'm worried now that the ham radio community is going to get flooded by all these people who are listening to you and being like, that's exactly what I need.
That would be wonderful. My secret purpose in all of this is like to have people like become aware that this amazing thing exists. Yeah. And like you can nerd out and find other like techno geeks. You can find other like preppers and people that are into like sustainability and this sort of stuff in this community. And you can find other people like me that are like connectors in society, right? And that just are there for the human connection and the resilience of. Anyway, it's so. I hope we get flooded. Please sign up. Yeah, I'll give you a couple of links that you can check out. And okay, I hope that's okay.
Of course, yeah.
Okay,
of course. That's fabulous. So you've talked about diversity of this community a number of times, and so I'm curious, what that looks like. What does that kind of diversity look like to you, and how do you know that that's present?
Yeah, no, it's a really interesting question. And ham radio is kind of interesting because it brings together like so many different groups of people that are interested in different things and from different walks of life. So overall, like the community does tend to skew a little bit older. And it's because it's been around for a long time, but I'm noticing this resurgence now. And I think that it's because of some of the reasons that we've talked about, people looking to connect in new ways and like sort of revive older technologies and that sort of stuff. There's more men in it than women in it, but there's some really interesting groups too. Like there's a number of kids that are getting into it. Like there are educational, like after school programs where kids are getting licensed and getting into it. So there's some diversity there. And surprisingly, like I'm finding that there's more queer people as well coming into. Hang on a second. I forgot I left my radio on. Did you hear that?
Yes.
Just a second. I guess maybe we'll get a little demo here. KB9IQX, KJ7NUW. Amy, I'm in the middle of doing a podcast right now. So can I call you back after I'm done?
I totally believe it. They will be monitoring. I'm just kind of moving with my day. I'm going to be out and about. So I will be monitoring for most of the day. 3373 for now, KB9IQX.
Okay, Amy. I'll call you afterwards. KJ7NUW. Sorry about that. On the weekends especially, my friend Amy and I will I don't know, we'll chat on here, or sometimes we'll meet and go out for like barbecue or something like that.
Nice.
Anyway, yeah,
that's
she's a lot
perfect.
of fun.
Now we all know what it's like.
Okay, where was I? Yeah, so we're talking about diversity. Yeah, so like there's a number of queer people on there. There's a number of people that are like ex-military. They learned to like operate radio in the military. I think, we always could use more. Like the more different experiences and life perspectives and honestly skills, right? The better. And so, this is something that I want to really encourage and lean into and all of that stuff. One thing that's interesting about diversity is like you talk to like people that have been in this for a while, and they'll say that like part of the power and the resilience that comes from ham radio is that there's a whole bunch of different technology that is used. And like ham radio operators are include people who like work for NASA and developed communication protocols that can communicate with like the Voyager,
Wow.
space, right?
Yeah.
Or they develop technologies and digital technologies that like literally power our cell phones these days.
Yeah.
So like you have this community of people that are experimenters, and there's this incredible diversity of technology behind it. And so when there's like interference, like if there's a solar flare that hits us, right, or whatever, there are going to be hams that know how to operate in those kinds of conditions. And there's incredible technical diversity there. But it's not just technical diversity that gives us resilience. It is also the diversity that comes from experience and backgrounds and points of view and all of these different things that make up community. And that's what makes our society resilient. So for me, there's all of these lessons and all of these connections for me between the tech part of it and the social part of it that just gets me on a soapbox.
I love it. It's the best kind of soapbox. And yeah, like you said, I think it's so lovely to hear of a space where that diversity is encouraged, and it's all, like you said, for a specific purpose, which is like resilience, connection, and the more, the better, the more, the merrier. And I wonder if part of that is that you do leave the politics and religion off the table and kind of say like, we're focused on this, even though I would like to think that if we talked about politics and religion, we could still find ways to connect and be good together and all these kinds of things. But it's, obviously that's been increasingly challenging in our society. So,
yeah.
So if someone wants to learn more about ham, how do they get started? Where do they go?
Yeah. So there's tons of resources obviously on the internet to learn about ham radio. I think two that come to mind for me would be one, the ham radio group that I'm part of locally here in the Puget Sound area in Seattle. It's a really active and fun community. And you can listen to our local like hams online. There's a way that you can go to our website and you can hear what it sounds like, what people are talking about, and like what this community is kind of about. We do 3 like call-in shows kind of a day. They're called nets. It's all Pacific time, 9 a.m., noon, and 9 p.m. every single day of the year. And you can listen on the website, which is psrg.org, the Puget Sound Repeater Group. There's a listen now button, and you can just kind of listen in. If you listen in during those times, you definitely hear people like calling in. So that gives a feel for it. Yeah. And then the organization that kind of connects all of us together is called ARRL, the American Radio Relay League. And their website is arrl.org. They have a little video that's like, what is ham radio? So that's a good way to do it too. But also you can just find a local ham group, get connected, and, chances are you're going to find some really interesting people there.
Awesome. Fabulous. Yeah, we'll put those links in the show notes so people have those as well, easy accessible. So I asked this question to pretty much everyone. If you were talking to someone or someone who's listening is feeling isolated and they're trying to find ways to connect, what advice might you give them?
I think the most important thing is just like taking the first step. And for me, what that meant during the pandemic was like just thinking back through my memories of times where like I felt like I found a connection and like just taking a first step, like a personal trainer would tell me, if I had one, the first step in like starting to run a marathon is like get up off the couch, go outside, and so I think that taking the first step is really key. But I will say that like there are so many communities of people out there organized around really interesting and kind of weird things.
Yeah.
And they don't always get all of the fanfare. some of them are a little bit like legacy. They're a little bit older or whatever, but they do exist. And ham radio is one of those things. But there's so many others. And I'm so excited about this podcast that you're doing, Emily, because I know that I only know of a few of these things from my own life. And I'm looking forward to seeing what you find. I think it's such an important topic. I'm so glad you invited me on.
Thank you so much. Madelyn, it's been such a pleasure. Thank you for sharing all of this with us and just such a fascinating topic. I want to talk about it for hours, which we will probably at some point. But yeah, really appreciate your time. Thank you to everyone who has listened and watched along. If you have comments, we'd love to know your thoughts on the discussion. If you have questions for Madelyn, things you want to ask us about, we would love to hear that. Please leave a comment wherever you're watching or listening. And otherwise, we will see you next time.